Besides, how do I get started? The next most common question that I get about IULs is it too late? Am I too old? And there are really two major things that are going to determine the answer to that question. Let's start with the simplest one first, and that is going to be your age. You can get an IUL from 2 weeks old all the way to 85. And so there is a wide range of ages where you can get an IUL. I want to also add a caveat that age range is not the same for every single insurance company. So different insurance companies have different ranges that they approve. So if you talk to somebody and they said they could not do an IUL for your teenager, they did not lie. So don't go at them and be upset, right? That's just based on the carriers that they have access to. Same thing with the upper end, right? Plenty of companies will only insure up until 70 or 75. So if you talk to somebody and they said that it wasn't doable, again, it is just based on the companies that they have access to. So based on the companies that I have access to, that I work with, the age range is 2 weeks old all the way to 85. It is important to note, though, that even though you can technically get an IUL at age 85, it is going to be extremely expensive. So think of it like car insurance, right? If you have a vehicle and you have a brand new car has more value, and so your insurance on it is going to be more expensive versus if you insure that car 10 years later or 20 years later, it's going to be way cheaper. But in the terms of humans, it's actually flipped, right? So in terms of humans, a brand new human, so a baby, is, I'm not going to say less valuable, but it's cheaper to insure a brand new human because there's a lower chance of that human passing away, right? What insurance companies are looking at is like risk of passing away because that is where they have to pay out, right? So the older you are, even if you're in perfect health, you are closer to your death date. And so for that reason, your insurance costs are going to be a lot higher. And so even though you can get an IUL at 85, you have to have the budget to support that because it's going to be extremely expensive to insure you versus if you started this IUL at 40, 30, or even 50. The second thing, which is usually the main factor that determines being too late to get an IUL, is going to be your health. Now, again, when we're thinking about life insurance, the life insurance company is looking at risk, right? So for them, they're asking themselves, if we approve this policy for this person, how long are they going to live, right? Are they going to live a very long time, in which case it's a good investment on the insurance company's part? If they're going to live a short amount of time, then it's not a good risk for the company to take. Thinking about your health, nobody can determine when you're going to pass away, right? But insurance companies have very smart people that look at mortality rates, they look at data, and they understand if somebody has XYZ disease and there's a higher probability of them passing away soon. Your health is a major factor that's going to determine whether or not it is too late for you to get an IUL. And some of these health factors are things that make it where you absolutely cannot get an IUL ever. And some of the things are going to be things where if you work on these things and make them better, then you can get an IUL later. So you do not need to be in absolute perfect health in order for you to get an IUL, but you do need to be relatively healthy. And that is relatively healthy based on medical standards, right? Just not relatively healthy like you feel good, but actually relatively healthy in terms of like documented medical records that show that there is nothing going on with you medically where something could go wrong down the line. Some of the things health-wise that will make it where it is too late for you to get an IUL would be if you have a cancer diagnosis, if you've had a heart attack, if you've had stroke. Those are some of the major things that are going to make it where if you have a history of this, you are not going to be able to get an IUL. It is too late for you to get an IUL. That is not an exhaustive list, right? You are going to have a conversation with either an agent or a broker to talk through your health situation in order to determine like whether or not it is too late for you to get an IUL because of your health. There are other things health-wise that could stop you from getting an IUL, but if you improve on these things, then you can get an IUL when your health improves, right? So for example, you can absolutely get denied for an IUL if you're overweight. But what this specific number is that'll get you denied depends on your age and your gender and your height. That is why it's important for you to have a conversation to discuss what's going on with you medically, because a lot of the times these things are going to be nuanced. And by the way, if you want to work with me to open your IUL, the link to work with me is in the description. Another practical example of something medical that could hold you back temporarily is going to be like if you have diabetes. So having diabetes alone, type 2 diabetes, does not make it where you cannot get an IUL. However, if your A1C is really high, or if you have diabetes and then you have a few other things going on medically as well, then that might make it where it's going to be a no. But in terms of like your A1C, if your A1C is too high today, if you reduce your A1C, if you lose the weight, if you have high blood pressure and you're on 3 medications and you bring that down to 1 medication, then that makes it where you are actually able to get an IUL later down the line, even if you cannot get an IUL today, right? So the health thing is that there are specific health factors that are going to make it where you are no longer going to be insurable. Those are things that are like a hard and fast no, you cannot get an IUL because of your health. Then there's other health things where maybe it's a situation where you cannot get an IUL right now, but you can get an IUL later. These things are nuanced and these things also differ from company to company. So in terms of diabetes, different companies have different A1Cs where once you hit this A1C, they will not approve a policy. And that's why sometimes it's useful to work with a broker like myself where there's multiple insurance companies that we work with. That way we can connect you with the company where you have the biggest chance of getting approved based on what is going on with you and also based on what your goal is. Now, even though technically it might not be too late for you to get an IUL, it does not necessarily mean that it is financially wise and a good idea for you to do it. So make sure you check out this video right here for a few questions that you want to ask yourself to determine if getting an IUL actually makes financial sense for you. I'll see you there.